we are really honored to bring you this panel with some of the most active and visible ace and aro activists in really the world today. And I would love if you could introduce yourself and give us an impression of your identities and what they mean to you. We can start with Sofia, since you are there for me.
My pronouns, by the way, are she, her. I am aromantic and asexual, and I am one of the founding members of Asexual Association Denmark. And we can get to that later.
Angela?
Hi everyone, my name is Angela. I am a journalist in New York City. I wrote the book Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex. It came out last September, and I identify as biromantic and asexual. And for me, I feel like it took quite a while for me to realize that I was ace, because I'm not celibate and I have very strong aesthetic attractions and I've been in long-term relationships with partners. And so it's been interesting for me to experience my end of the spectrum of ace experience.
Do I go next? Hi everybody, my name is Yasmin, Benoit, and I am a British model. I'm also aromantic and asexual and an activist. I'm on the board of the Asexual Visibility and Education Network, Elan. I'm also an asexualities researcher at California State University, San Bernardino. And a lot of my work ends up being quite public facing. I do a lot of media stuff in the UK, and I'm leading quite a few international publications, but I also do quite a few things behind the scenes, and I write articles. I started #This is what asexual looks like and co-founded International Asexuality Day. And I also do quite a bit of public speaking like this, so thanks for having me.
Yeah. First, we could kind of do the basic 101 stuff, and asexuality is usually defined as, a lack of attraction. But what does this mean, and how does this present? If Yasmin, you could maybe talk about your experience.
Yeah, so I'm asexual and aromantic, so I take it by the kind of most general definition, and for asexual, that's experiencing little to no sexual attraction, and being aromantic means I don't experience romantic attraction either, so I experience little to no romantic attraction. And those terms I only started to use those because I needed an answer to other people's questions. And if it wasn't for other people's constant questions about what my identity is, why aren't I doing what other people are doing, why aren't I reacting to things the way other people are, it wouldn't have been something I would have given much thought to or probably even discovered as early as I did. I realized I was asexual and aromantic when everyone else seemed to realize that they weren't, but I didn't encounter the language until I was about 15, which I guess comparatively is probably quite young. I've always used various terms to try and explain my sexual orientation to people, but of course they can manifest in a variety of ways, and for me, I wouldn't use the term sex repulsed, which the community often uses to describe asexual people that wouldn't engage in sex with someone else. And I wouldn't use that because I definitely don't feel as though I'm repulsed by sex. I just don't want to do it. I don't have any inclination to do it. So I'm the kind of asexual person that doesn't have sex. Probably wouldn't use the term celibate, but I guess in essence it kind of is what it is. But I am the kind of ace person that can still experience arousal, that can still have sexual interest. I guess it's just completely independent of other people. So I tend to describe it as a sexual orientation that just isn't oriented anywhere.
Yeah, Angela, if you could talk a bit about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in many ways my experience is almost the opposite of Yasmin's experience. So I came across the word asexual probably around the same time, probably 14, 15, and I learned about it online. And at the time, I just thought, oh, this is interesting, and I didn't think about it again. To me, I did not at all wonder if I was asexual, because when I read the definition that it means a lack of sexual attraction, I really thought it meant that either someone was sex repulsed, which I'm not and have never been, or that they just didn't want to have sex. And at that point, I'd never had sex before, but I had crushes, and there were people I was romantically interested in, and I was interested in sex as this idea that other people were telling me something that is very exciting and has all of this cultural significance attached to it. And so because I wasn't repulsed by sex, because I was interested in it for these aesthetic and emotional and cultural reasons, there was no sign to me that I was any different from my friends who were straight and heterosexual women. And it was actually only after, it was a decade later when I was, in my mid-20s, after I'd been in 2 serious relationships, that I began to question whether I was ace or not. And so it's so interesting to me, and I think this experience is quite common, people will tell me this after reading my book, is that people will read the word asexual and they just think it can't apply to them, because our conversation about what sexual attraction actually is often so limited. And people think they know what it means, but so much of the time they don't. And so that, once again, another example of how diverse ace experience can be.
Yeah, definitely. And I also have had a similar experience to Angela, but also a different one, in that I was super into the concept of sex and wanted to write porn and everything. And then I experienced that when I actually tried to do it, it was awful and I hated it. And I kept trying and finding different ways. And in the end, I had to acknowledge that my experience of these things are purely theoretical and not something I want to do physical. So I would sort of be a sex positive ace that doesn't want anything to do with it.
A lot of people, I think, really have that experience where the concept of sex and how it's portrayed in the media or how it's talked about is very exciting to them. And so, I've spoken to so many people who say that when they actually had sex, because it was so put on a pedestal, it was very hard to reconcile their real experiences from what they thought they wanted.
Yeah. And aromanticism is probably even less known than asexuality. And I wanted, Sofia, if you could talk a bit about your experience and what aromanticism is.
Yeah, sure. To be on the aromantic spectrum means that you never or rarely experience romantic attraction, meaning basically that you don't fall in love and you don't feel the desire to be in a relationship. I remember, for me, the best description of this, when I explain it to others, has always been to bring up the famous Plato myth about when originally that people were just a big ball with four legs and 4 arms and 2 heads, and they were split, and they were meant to just keep searching for the other part. And that made so much sense to me, because that from what I've seen on shows and from what the way romance is described, that made so much sense. But for me, it was like, yeah, but I've never been split. Nothing is missing. I don't feel like there's anything to go out and look for. So that's basically the best way for me to describe it, because people, when they talk about aromanticism, or when they hear about aromanticism for the first time, and from that I mean in Denmark, for example, where people don't know the term, when they hear about this the first time, the first reaction people usually get are, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Because the whole that you don't fall in love thing is it's said to be such a sad thing, because like you're missing some part of you that should be there. But the thing is, from what I just described with the Plato myth. For me, it's like, no, you're the one who are missing something. I'm complete. So yeah, that's the best way for me to describe it.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to add to that, Yasmin, or...
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't actually heard the Plato myth before, but I have used the exact same language when I was doing a piece for British Vogue. I think the headline was pretty much like, I was born complete, and this narrative of you are incomplete until you find someone, I never really related to that. It's like, yeah, there might be people that might be beneficial to have around, and maybe they have a skill set that I don't have, but I'm not incomplete. Like that, that was kind of, that exact language is something I have used before to kind of combat that idea. And I definitely had a very similar experience with people kind of approaching it in the sense that they've been taught that romance is so fundamental and romantic love is the ultimate love. And therefore, if you say that you don't experience that, people are innately sympathetic and they think that you're the one who's like suffering from something. And so based on how much relationship drama everyone else seems to have, I think you're probably the one that needs them to, rather than you. So I've definitely had that kind of experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can kind of segue from that into the fact that ace and aro people very often do get those kind of negative comments. They get that kind of, we are compared as incomplete, that we are robots, that we don't have a full emotional spectrum. And like, how can the bigger queer community help combat those kinds of prejudices? You can kind of just Yasmin, maybe, if you want to start.
Well, I think a lot of the prejudices that I have encountered within the LGBTQ plus community, it tends to come from a place of miseducation and also a kind of innate wariness, which stems from the way we've been taught to understand sexuality and romantic orientations. I think that within the queer community, there's a belief that asexuality means being anti-sex. And that therefore you are, I mean, I've literally heard this from people, that we'd be threatening those spaces by stopping other people from expressing their sexuality or being proud of who they're sexually attracted to. And then at the same time, our society kind of teaches you that if you don't experience sexual attraction, then you probably do have some kind of emotional problem or physical problem, or there's just something wrong with you. And despite the fact that all of these rhetorics are very kind of queer-phobic and they seemingly stem from these same heteronormative ideals that hinder the queer community, I think people don't really recognize it in the same way. And I think that one of the best ways to kind of combat this would pretty much just be education, and not even just in the sense of understand what asexuality is or understand what aromanticism is, but in the sense of one of the best things about the queer community is that they have such diverse conversations about sexuality, and they really dissect it and they kind of dismantle these preconceived ideas. And I feel like we could expand that further to take into consideration the nuances of sexual attraction and sexual desire and sexual interest and different types of attraction, whether it's romantic or sexual or platonic or aesthetic or sensual. And I think that kind of thinking would benefit everybody, but innately it would end up benefiting the asexual and aromantic community as well, and hopefully combat some of those negative ideas.
Yeah. One thing I would add, if I can jump in, is that I think it's really important to not have this framing of the queer community and then the aces, because we're one and the same. You know, there are so many aces who are trans and gender nonconforming. There are aces who are lesbians. There are aces who are gay, for example. So it's not, you know, when you support aces, you also support the broader, you know, queer community. And I think that, you know, a lot of the ideas that we talk about, that Yasmin just said, about the nuances of sexual attraction, what that means, these are applicable beyond aces. And these are applicable even if you are allosexual and you are straight. I think so often some of the ideas and models that the ace communities come up with are seen as only relevant if you identify as ace. But I think they're really interesting and helpful to think about regardless of where you fall in terms of sexual romantic identity. And in the same way, you know, I completely agree. I think there's a perception that aces are anti-sex, but I think what aces really want is for everyone to just be more thoughtful about what they want sexually, whether that really is a lot of sex, which is totally fine, or if maybe everyone feels a lot of pressure to be sexual in ways that maybe is not actually what you want. And so I think there's so much that we can offer. It's not this question of encroaching or this question of taking the resources. I think there's so much to learn between and within the community.
Yeah, and we also saw this with the recent Twitter drama about kink at Pride, where they kept using asexuality as an argument against kink, as a sort of oh no, aces don't want to see kink, and for them to be protected at Pride, we can't have kink at Pride, and it is setting us up as a sort of antithesis to Pride, really. And that is kind of the same thing with, assumed sexuality in a way. We are assumed to be anti-sex and not kink, which we all know is very often very wrong. And we could kind of segue from that to talk into, I think, ascribed sexuality, which I think is a very interesting subject, and Yasmin experiences a lot, especially with your recent Vogue Greece photo shoot, where you got a lot of pushback on Twitter about it. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Of course, I'm experiencing my asexuality from the perspective of a Black woman, and we are probably one of the most hypersexualized demographics in existence. And consequently, throughout my life, I've noticed people have a harder time believing that I'm asexual. They sexualize me in a range of completely non-sexual circumstances, and some of the things I experience, particularly online, is an example of that. I mean, I do model lingerie, so if people were gonna, kind of place sexuality onto that, I'd be like, okay, I get it. I mean, I'm promoting a product, it's a job, it's not a reflection of my actual emotions, but I could understand that more. But quite recently, I had the experience of doing a photo shoot for Vogue Greece, which was very couture, wearing a giant dress, and I still had the exact same reactions of, if you're asexual, you shouldn't look like that. Why are you wearing an ankle bracelet? Why are you wearing makeup? Your face is too sexy. Your hand is sexy. You're like, everything about this is practically porn, I was told. And that was kind of like, it's not something I hadn't experienced before, but it was yet another reminder of how, what, particularly when you say that you're asexual, people find that very challenging to believe. I've been doing the same sorts of modeling for years before I publicly said I was asexual, and people never questioned anything I was doing before that. But there is a very old-fashioned belief, strangely today, that especially if you're a woman, you only put any kind of effort into your appearance, or you only present yourself with the intention of sexually attracting someone, particularly a man, which prior to me becoming an activist, I thought we had kind of moved away from that idea, but I still get that so often. It's like, well, why is your hair done if you don't want me to have sex with you? Why are you wearing makeup if you don't want me to have sex with you? Why, even if I'm covered from here to my ankles, it's still, well, for an asexual person, that's a sexual jumpsuit you're wearing. And you really can't avoid that kind of sexualization. And I think I think that being asexual, it kind of adds another layer to challenge these incredibly outdated beliefs that are unfortunately still very prominent. And also this kind of idea that you need to tailor your self-expression depending on your sexuality, which makes no sense. You can't dress gay, you can't dress straight, you can't dress bi, and you can't dress asexual. But I've been told my whole life that I don't look asexual, or I don't seem asexual, because of all these stereotypical ideas that people have, which are actually literally impossible to fit these ideas. There's no way to please people with these kinds of attitudes. But yes, unfortunately, I tend to be in the firing line for a lot of these things.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's the race aspect, it's the beauty aspect, it's how you present, and then This the kind of the opposite thing is, but if you're fat, if you're disabled, if you have something, you know, that's different from the norm, you often go the exact opposite side and you be desexualized, and you kind of get an assumed asexuality put on you. So there's really like no winning. Like either you have to be hypersexualized or you have to be not sexualized, but you don't get to present your own identity regardless of how you dress. You wrote about that a bit, Angela.
Yeah, definitely. In my book, I wrote a little bit about the intersection of asexuality and disability, and how, you know, especially in the earlier years of the ace movement, there was some tension there, because I think people have long thought that people who are asexual, that it is some kind of physical or psychological problem, you know, to be fixed. And so aces have long said, you know, we're not disabled, we're perfectly healthy, we're fine. At the same time, as you just said, many people who are disabled, whether that means they're physically disabled or even neuroatypical, are often desexualized against their will. They're ascribed a lack of sexuality and are assumed to not want sex. And so there's, you know, a lot of disability activism saying we're just like everyone else. You know, we are normal too. We want sexuality. And so I think that's where some of the tensions used to come in. And I think the way to think about it is just, it doesn't have to be, you know, if we didn't ascribe sexuality, then we wouldn't have this kind of stereotype to go against. You know, if we didn't think that asexuality was some kind of disorder, and if we didn't think that being disabled meant that you had to be desexualized, then there wouldn't be so much of the desire to push against it in ways that might exclude other parts of the community, because there absolutely are aces who are disabled, and I know that oftentimes they feel like there's not a place in either community, that the ace community doesn't welcome them because maybe disabled aces are politically inconvenient, and they'll tell me that the disabled community doesn't really accept them either, and they'll feel like a bad disabled person because, once again, it is politically inconvenient. So really, this ascribed sexuality ends up harming so many different types of people. And, you know, going back to what Yasmin said, I think my experience, once again, was maybe kind of the opposite, because as an Asian woman, you know, there's certain stereotypes. Sometimes Asian women are hypersexualized, but other times Asian women are already seen as kind of asexual, you know, kind of submissive, very, you know, very quiet. And so that is a form of ascribed sexuality too. And I've talked to other people who are Asian women or who were socialized as Asian women, and then we'll often say that we had trouble claiming asexuality because it felt like we were fitting into a stereotype. You know, if people already were assuming negatively that Asian women were asexual and we claimed asexuality, it felt like we were just proving their assumptions correct. So there's a lot of nuance here in the ways that different stereotypes can be really limiting.
Yeah, and we see the same with aromanticism too, where especially aromantic men are kind of ascribed this kind of sex pest sort of idea about that they don't want connection, they just want to have sex. And there's this idea that aromanticism means you don't want any relationship, which is of course completely false, because there's many relationships that aren't romantic. Right, Sofia, if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. There is, getting off track. There is very many ways that aromantic people can go into relationships and have different kinds of love in their lives without it being romantic. For me, my heart is my own and no one is getting in here, but I do have very many friends. I have a queer platonic relationship with my best friend, who is straight, but he lives with me in my apartment. And it works. Like you have to find your own way to look at relationships that doesn't fit the necessary rules for relationships, the normal rules for relationships, and find your own way. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, it's very hot here. Yeah, so queer platonic relationships can be defined in many ways, but for me, it's just a person that I can make plans with, that I can be kind of a partner with, but without it having any romantic or sexual connotations at all.
Yeah, and I recently listened to a Zoom conference that was about asexuality and isolation and COVID, that brought up the same kind of thing, that asexuality and aromanticism can teach us a lot about how to form different kind of relationships, how this goal of having the one partner often causes this issue of you have nobody when a disaster strikes, because you haven't found the one. And yeah, you wrote a bit about this too, Angela. You want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot about just the way that our society is structured, the assumption of the nuclear family, and even at the level of marriage rights. And I'm speaking for the United States, which is where I am, but I think this is probably true in other countries as well. There are so many rights you receive upon being married to someone that you don't receive if you're, even if someone is as important to you as a partner, but there's not that romantic feeling. And I think that automatically privileges romantic bonds over other bonds that are non-romantic, but maybe just as important. And so socially, in every way, I think we really privilege that sort of bond. As an example, of course, before COVID, I used to go to weddings, and it's very expected that, if you have a partner, they can be your plus one. But in the past, in times when I haven't had a partner, I've often wanted to ask, oh, is it okay if I bring my best friend, who we've been friends with for 10 years? It felt less okay to me. Ask, it's okay to use my plus one on my partner. So from the level of law to the level of small etiquette, things like that, it's really clear. And another thing I think about all the time is the issue of caretaking. I really think that, I'm not aromantic, but many aromantic people tell me that other people tell them, oh, who's going to take care of you when you're old? Aren't you going to be old and alone? What are you going to do when? And that's not a question that I think anybody should be worrying about. Even if you're not aromantic, maybe you're not going to find someone, maybe you're not going to get married. People shouldn't be entering relationships because they're afraid of no one taking care of them. And so if we had a more expansive view of what caretaking might look like, again, and compensation level, but also in how we arrange kinship in societies, I think that would really benefit everyone.
I definitely can relate to that. I have experienced in Denmark a few cases where the whole relationship thing was suddenly very important, which was very strange. Recently my roommate and I were about to move apartments, and we were out looking for apartments, and when we wrote in to know more about an apartment, we were asked to define the relationship, and we just wrote no roommates or something. And we were told that no, they don't accept roommates. And I remember actually asking several different companies okay, so if we had said that we were boyfriend and girlfriend, then yeah, that would be okay. And I remember my roommate just saying that we should just lie. We should just tell them that we are boyfriend and girlfriend, and that's it. And I just felt very strongly that no, I'm not going to lie about this. I am very much not going to lie about this. If I have to walk down to their offices and strike or protest, I don't know, because this is not fair. This is not okay. I'm going to go down and do a lecture about aromanticism for them, because it's not okay to exclude people. And I know where it comes from, because I know that in these buildings they have a problem with a lot of young people moving in the same apartment and holding a lot of parties. But it still shouldn't dismiss it still. I mean, people in relationships still hold parties, so it shouldn't be a matter of if you're friends or your boyfriend and girlfriend. And also, and I mentioned this before also in our setup, I am a Swedish citizen, even though I live in Denmark, and when I need to renew my passport in Sweden, and if I don't have a Swedish ID, because it ran out at the same time, I need to have someone vouch for me. And that person needs to be a parent, or a child, or a spouse. And that's it. So at some point, and also the parent needs to be someone with a Swedish passport. So at some point when my mother is not alive anymore, I don't know how I'm going to renew my passport in Sweden. Because I am not planning on getting married just so that person can vouch for me.
Yeah, I have a couple of it. One thing that I've noticed logistically in this country, which I hadn't really thought of before, is my mom has private health care, and you're allowed to put your partner on it, but you can't put your adult child on it. Mm-hmm. And I thought that seems kind of weird that you can, so only if you're married to the person are they then also entitled to the health care, but your children aren't equal enough to be entitled to the same thing, and your partner's probably old enough to pay for their own health care, but your kids don't get it. So that was something I always found quite strange. I mean, logistically, your partner could also be closer in age to your child, and they would still then get it just because you're married, but not the person you literally gave birth to. And also, I was doing an interview. I can't remember what it was for because I do so many over here. But they asked me about my romantic situation, and I told them I don't experience romantic attraction. And sometimes when I'm doing interviews, I ask them to repeat back what they wrote down, if I can kind of tell they're not really getting it. And I said, what did you write there? And he said, I said you don't value human relationships. And I was like, that's not what I said. I thought it was romantic attraction. That's not the same thing. But it's strange that in their mind, that equaled the same thing. And I've encountered that quite a few times, which is why I always ask people to repeat it back to me, because that's almost what they printed in this publication. And I think it goes to show how people see romantic attraction and romantic love as being so intrinsic that it's reflective of everything else. Like I often get people asking me, so you don't have friends then? So you don't have any relationships at all? And I'm like, do you think I gave birth to myself? Like, do you think I'm not related to anyone? Like, there's so many different types of relationships that people do instinctively associate that as being the ultimate relationship. Therefore, you're not interested in anything and you spend your whole life in a lonely bubble, which is strange, but a consequence of the way we're taught to understand relationships in our society, sadly.
Yeah, definitely. And I've had the same thing as, when you apply for apartments as single, it's kind of this, are you going to bring people home? We have these, you can't have people sleeping over. And it's like, I wasn't really going to have a party. I just wanted to have a place to live.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And it's interesting how many, like when we start to think about it, when we start to analyze it, just how many parts of society is built around this idea of the prime relationship. And that hurts everybody. Like that doesn't hurt just ace and aro people, that also hurts lesbians, it hurts gay people, it hurts polyamorous people, it hurts everybody who has this need for a different kind of relationship than from what the norm presents us with, you're going to get married, you're going to have kids, you're going to have the white picket fence and a dog, usually. And it's just like, how do we move forward from this? Like, how do we present an idea of a different kind of relationship to the world? Angela, maybe.
I think first, I think we need to go beyond the ACE 101 conversation. I think now, in the US, I think a lot of the ACE movement began here. And so it has been around for 20 years. And still, even when I'm doing interviews, I had someone ask me if asexuality was my gender. And, that's something that you can just Google. That's not, first, I think all of us need to move beyond the definitions of asexuality. And second, I think a lot of it has to do with modeling what is possible. And I hesitate to say that because I think that often puts the pressure on the individual. And that's a lot of pressure to, you personally find what works for you. But the thing I'm thinking of is that I did, in my book, I wrote about David J., who's the founder of Elan, and how he has a 3-parent family, and he's somewhere on the aromantic spectrum, he's asexual, and so he is co-parents with 2 other folks, and is an equal father to their biological daughter. And it was interesting to me because I excerpted that in The Atlantic, and then people were writing to me thinking, oh, I never thought that I wanted kids, but now I realize I just didn't want kids within the heteronormative model. I would have wanted kids in this kind of fashion. I would want kids if I could co-parent in some other kind of way, do platonic co-parenting. And I think that a lot of people just don't see those options. And I think the more that these options are available, the more that they are given, they're given visibility, I think that will spark ideas for people. So that is my hope too.
Yeah, Yasmin, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, I think you definitely need to show people what's possible and also show that that's a happy possibility, because I think we're definitely taught that the reason why things are the way they are is because that's going to be your happiest outcome. Like, that is the way you achieve happiness. And I noticed in my experiences when I've done things in the media, there's been a kind of leaning towards misfortune when they're approaching things. It's always, so how hard is that for you? Let's talk about the struggle. Let's talk about how you struggle to function in our society. I'm like, I'm actually doing pretty well, thanks. And then they're kind of like, oh, well, that wasn't really what we were going for. I've noticed there's been multiple times where they've really stopped wanting you to sound too happy or too confident or like things are going too well, because they kind of preferred this narrative of this person fits outside of a heteronormative expectations, and now they're suffering as a result. And I encounter many of asexual people who are like, I was hesitant to use this label because it just seemed unfortunate. It was something that was kind of associated with your like Sheldon Cooper types, and I thought I would have to act like this, so everyone would think that I'm this way, and they think I was really awkward and that I couldn't socialize and I can experience love and I can't do this and I can't do that. And I think we also just need to kind of give people a chance to see that you can be asexual and you can be aromantic, and that's not a limitation. That's not really you lacking in anything. It's just one of the many different diverse experiences of sexuality that everybody has, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to live some like sad, lonely life, or things are necessarily going to be so much harder for you. It's just going to be a different kind of experience. I mean, I see people that aren't asexual and aren't aromantic, and they're navigating romantic relationships and navigating their sexuality seems hard. Even if they're just like straight and they're just dating, like there's still a lot of baggage that comes to that too. And I think that the whole idea of let's be sympathetic to the asexual people and to the aromantic people, because they're the ones missing something and they're the ones suffering. I think we kind of need to kind of get out of that and see that it's not a hindrance at all.
Just to add a little bit, one thing I think about a lot is that the person who I am, I'm not a deficient man. I am a woman, right? I'm not a deficient white person. I'm an Asian person. And so I think many times, including in media, there is this idea that asexual people are somehow just a deficient version, similar to what Sofia said about, the Plato myth, a deficient version of something else, but it's actually you're just different. And so I wish we could take that same logic. I think very few people think that women are actually just deficient men and apply it to many other types of difference.
I would also like to jump in here just to comment on Yasmin, what you said, because I've also had quite a few interviews, and I've always tried to, both when I talk about asexuality and aromanticism, I've tried to project this like I'm asexual, I'm aromantic, and I'm happy. But it doesn't always work. And I remember, because that's when I need to talk about about asexuality, I usually use a line where I kind of diffuse the situation by saying that when people talk about sex, I turn 5 years old in my head because I really don't want to hear about it. And I remember it usually works because then people can laugh about it and they can understand that, and I can talk about the fact that I fit the stereotype very well, and and we can laugh about it and we can move on. But the last interview I did about asexuality, I did that line, and they kept, like you said, Yasmin, they kept talking about what struggles I had been through and how what experiences, the bad experiences I had been through in my growing up life, and then I had no experiences to relate. And I remember when I wrote the interview that they had written, and it was journalism students, so they weren't experienced, but still they had used my line about being 5 years old as the headline, meaning like, look at Sofia, look how sad her life is, and I just felt crushed. And since then I stopped the interview and I stopped it from going any further, but still since then I don't do interviews about asexuality, not on paper, because I really don't want that to happen again. With aromanticism, I can actually just be like, I don't fall in love and I'm happy. But with asexuality, it's just I have to talk about the thing that I don't want to talk about, and then I fit the stereotype, and they think that all ace people don't want to talk about sex, and yeah. So sorry if that was too much, but it's just fit.
No, it's a lot of the reason I also am not public about my asexuality is because my asexuality has a lot of trauma with it. That's how I found out who I am. It was through a lot of trauma. And that means that my experience would be negative, and that is not the view I want people to have of asexuality. It's like I am happy with my identity, I'm proud of my identity, but the way I got there was a lot of hurt. And I also, like, if I could go back to what we were talking about, I was thinking that when I came out as non-binary, I got a lot of the same questions that, like, does this mean you're into women now? Does this mean you're gonna like change your entire sexuality? Does this mean that you kind of are sexual, you've just had the wrong sex your whole life? And like there's these expectations of that sexuality is the default and that you're just having trauma that has stopped you from it, and if you figure out the right identity, then you're suddenly going to start having sex again. And it is this really frustrating combination of identity and sexuality that I wish we could get past.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think we can open for questions. If people have questions they want to ask, I think Nils Erik will bring the microphone along. If anybody please have.
Yeah, I have two questions. First of all, what legislative change would you like to see, since we're talking about how society is built for romantic relationships, and what kind of legislative change would be good, and what is most useful in your eyes for in the near future that could be like reached within a couple of years maybe? And secondly, within the trans community, this was more in the past, but there's been like big discourse and schism between like what it means to be kind of correct trans and people saying you need dysphoria to be trans. Is there some kind of schism like that, or has there been within the ace or aro community? Yeah, thank you.
Angela, maybe you can take the thing about the first question.
Absolutely. So once again, I'm speaking from the American perspective, but I think this can probably generalize. Going back to marriage law, I know there's a lot of scholarship thinking about what are the types of unions and partnerships that we might want to value and to elevate, and why does it have to be limited to romantic relationships. So I know that there are scholars, for example, Elizabeth Brake, Tamara Metz, who talk about, it is when you have a union, it makes sense to provide privileges to it in some way, but what if it can just be intimate caregiving unions? It doesn't have to be, it could be me and my sister, for example, or me and my best friend, If there is mutual caretaking, why can't that be given the same level of protection and the same level, both cultural and, political and policy protection as marriages? So I think legislatively, that's one thing that I think about, and I'm not a legal scholar, so I also don't know how likely this is, but I think that is an avenue that's really, really worth thinking about.
Yasmin, maybe you can talk about the schisms, because you've experienced quite a few of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think to chip into the policy part a little bit, I know that in the UK, because of the phrasing of our Equality Act here, asexuality technically does not fall under it. It's specifically about opposite sex attraction or who you're attracted to, not being attracted to anyone. Also, we still have consummation laws here, and in our ISD, which is kind of like our version of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in the United States. I don't know what Norway's equivalent is, but asexuality is still partially pathologized in that. So those are some changes that could happen over here. I don't think we're covered by hate crime laws either. But in terms of schisms, I mean, yeah, there's definitely been a fair share of schisms in the ace community, kind of mainly about what qualifies as asexual. If you have had sex, there's been some people disagree that you should count as asexual if you still actively have sex, or if you experience any degree of sexual desire towards someone, or if you masturbate, if you have a libido, then some people want to debate whether that counts, or depending on where you fall on the spectrum. And I've encountered racism within the ace community just like I have everywhere else. There's definitely the kind of the anti-sex leaning parts. Like we definitely have the same kind of disagreements as lots of other communities have, sadly.
Yeah, we definitely have had the whole, and also there's also have you had trauma? Is your ace identity a representation of trauma? Then you aren't ace. There's so many different, small conflicts there.
Yeah, me again. And just like the follow-up to the legislative, would it then be logical to say that to just open civil partnerships to not only include romantic partnerships, but in law codify that I either mention a lot of them or just say it's an open definition of partnership, but these are the legal parameters, like you need to do something to become this partnership, but anyone can do it if they would like to.
I think that's what some people are interested in and looking to. I think one question there is that usually if you can be in a civil partnership with one person, I don't think, multiple marriages is legal in the US. I don't think it's legal in most of Europe. And so I think that brings up a whole other can of worms, right? Because for many of us, whether you are polyamorous or aromantic, we have multiple people in our lives that we are very close to. So I think it can be a whole can of worms, but I do know that there are people interested in opening up the idea of civil partnership, or like I said, creating categories, that I think civil partnership at this point, at least in the US, sounds so close to marriage that it might cause confusion. So I think there's just different terms that people are using. But I think the idea is similar.
Yeah, we're going to have next question.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Hello. A question for Angela Chen. So you said that Asian women in the United States have been both hypersexualized but also desexualized. So I was wondering if you have any. I was very curious about that, and if you can talk a bit about how minorities struggle with either hypersexualization or desexualization, and how you deal with that preconception in your life, and how that is to be both at the same time hypersexualized and desexualized at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just works in different ways. I think it's quite common for minority groups to be hypersexualized and desexualized. For example, and Yasmin can speak more to this, Black women are often hypersexualized, but in the United States, with our history of slavery, Black women are also desexualized. There's this idea of the mammy, this kind of sexless Black caretaker for white children. So going back to Asian women, sometimes I think there's this idea of the very exotic dragon lady who's going to seduce you, and that is one trope that's been present in media, again, in the United States. At the same time, I think there's also this idea of the very loyal, me love you long time, I'll always be here waiting for you, submissive woman who doesn't have any desires of her own. So I think in my life, growing up in a place that did have a lot of Asian folks, I personally didn't experience street. But I think what affected me most was the desexualization. And that's what I meant when I said sometimes it would be hard to claim asexuality. Whereas I know other people who didn't feel the desexualization that much because of their particular environment, but they very much felt the hypersexualization and the catcalling and the idea that Asian women are, there to provide sexual services.
Yasmin, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Black women kind of have a kind of similar experience. While we are hypersexualized, it's also with a constant reminder that we are generally considered as being the least attractive group of women of all time. You can Google it; they'll constantly be name dropping studies about how undesirable you are, about how no one wants to date you. The media constantly tells you that your complexion's too dark, your hair is too curly, you're the most likely to be a single mother, you're the least likely to be married. Even in the kind of things I get online, it's like, yes, in one breath you are being told you're too sexy for this, you're too sexy for that. But it's not, you might be sexy, but you're not respectable, you're not beautiful, you're not pretty, and it's only parts of you that are desired. I mean, you can turn on your TV and pay attention to how many dark-skinned Black women you'll see in a music video fully clothed, in comparison to the white women you'll see doing the same thing. It's like, yeah, that's the hypersexualization, but people don't look at that and think that's the kind of, that is a positive portrayal right there. And that tends to be the only portrayal. And thanks to the legacy of slavery, Black people are considered, in many parts of the world, I've traveled a lot of places, people say I'm sexy, but they'll call me a monkey at the same time. So it's that kind of weird dichotomy of being kind of eroticized. And when I did the thing with Vogue and everyone was picking me apart and telling me all these things and sexualizing every single part of me, it was overwhelmingly white women. It was not any Black people in that group of people that were doing that. And they had nothing to say about any of the white people in that same magazine. It was just me. And I've had the same thing doing documentaries. People wouldn't say anything about the white asexual girl, but when it came to me, they'd say, I hope you get raped and deported. And that's the kind of things I get. So it's a kind of, it's a sexualization, but it's not flattering. It's not in a kind of positive way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know don't want to add to the discussion, but I would like to point out that we have in Europe the stereotype of men marrying Asian women to Europe to kind of have somebody to take care of the house and not like consider them full humans in a way. It's a very kind of weird stereotype where we talk about people as a product in a really awkward way, and that kind of adds to that desexualization, I think, of this idea that you marry people for what they do in the home and not for who they are as people. And I think we need to wrap up now, but thank you so much for coming, all three of you. This has been so amazing to be able to put this panel on the main stage and talk about asexuality, talk about aromanticism, and everybody should go follow Yasmin's Instagram account because she posts so much cool stuff. And if anyone, do you want to have any ending words, everyone? Like Yasmin, you could start maybe.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. I've been listening to Norwegian heavy metal since I was like 14, so I've always had a weird affinity for Norway. So when I was asked to do Oslo Pride, I was like, yes, Norway, and hopefully next year I can finally set foot there in real life and finally experience your country. So thank you so much for having me. I've always really been interested in Norwegian culture, so thank you.
Yeah, I would say the same. Just thank you so much for having me, and hopefully in the future, like I said, the conversations can become more and more complex around, what to change and visions for what, a happy life for everyone can look like and what asexuality and aromanticism can bring.
Yeah, the same for me. I'm just very happy, very honored to be involved in this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and thank you audience for coming and people on stream who have been watching. And I think we are exactly on time, so we can say goodbye to the Zoom audience.
Bye.